had been a long week. Abigail had worked tirelessly on a project that seemed to suck the life out of her. When the weekend finally arrived, she found herself standing in front of a wooden cabin nestled deep within the foggy hills of New England. It was everything she needed: quiet, seclusion, a break from her usual world. The air felt colder than she expected as she stepped out of her car. The cabin was small but charming, with only a few others scattered within a mile, and the dense woods loomed just beyond the back porch. She could already feel the tension in her shoulders ease as she stepped inside, breathing in the earthy scent of pine and moss. After unpacking her things, Abigail decided to sit outside, enjoying the crisp air. She settled into one of the creaky wooden rocking chairs on the back porch, a mug of tea in hand, her eyes wandering over the sprawling forest. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. That was when she noticed him, a figure, a man, strolling through the dense trees at the edge of the property. He moved deliberately, almost as though he were searching for something. Abigail squinted, trying to make sense of the image, but as the man walked deeper into the woods, he became nothing more than a silhouette, swallowed by the shadows. Shaking off the unease crawling up her spine, she went inside for dinner and a quiet evening in front of the TV. The storm outside began to brew, winds picking up, trees creaking ominously against the coming gales. It was during a quiet scene in the film that Abigail was startled by a sudden, sharp ring of the doorbell. The cabin had a doorbell? She thought, confused. She hesitated for a moment before walking toward the door, opening it slightly to peek outside. Standing there was the same man she had seen earlier in the woods. His face was pale, his eyes unblinking, fixed on her with an unsettling intensity. "I'm lost," he said, his voice raspy, like it hadn't been used in years. "Could you help me find my way back to my cabin?" Abigail felt a chill crawl down her spine. Her mind raced. What cabin? There weren't any cabins around for miles. "Wait here," she said, her voice shaky despite her attempt to sound composed. "I'll grab my phone and help you." But when she turned to grab her phone, the door suddenly slammed shut. She didn't remember closing it. Confused and now growing more apprehensive, Abigail opened the door again. But he was gone. There was no trace of him anywhere, not on the porch or in the yard. It was as though he had vanished into thin air. Shaking her head, Abigail dismissed it as a strange moment of her imagination getting the best of her. But when the doorbell rang again the next morning, the dread settled into her bones. Peering out the window, she saw him again, the same man, standing at the edge of the woods. He was walking the same path, step by deliberate step, just as he had the day before. Abigail's heart skipped a beat. Something was wrong. She hurriedly packed her bags and checked every window, making sure the man hadn't returned. The eerie stillness of the cabin unnerved her further. After she confirmed that the coast was clear, she left for her car. As she began to back out of the driveway, Abigail glanced back at the cabin. For a brief moment, she saw the man, standing inside the window, staring at her, his expression unreadable. Her pulse quickened. She floored the gas pedal and sped away, leaving the house behind. When she arrived back home, Abigail immediately contacted the cabin's owner, expecting an apology or at least some concern for her safety. But the response she got was far colder than she anticipated. "I'm sorry you didn't enjoy your stay," was all the owner said, as though her unsettling experience was nothing more than an inconvenience. But what haunted Abigail the most was the man's presence. She could still feel his icy gaze, fixed on her even as she drove away. And even now, years later, she wonders if she was truly alone at that cabin, or if the shadow still watches her from the woods. Ethan had always felt at peace in the wilderness. It was where he found clarity, far away from the noise of the city and the chaos of everyday life. His yearly hikes through the Appalachian Mountains had become a ritual, a chance to escape and discover the world in a way few people ever did. This year, he'd set his sights on a secluded, unmarked trail, hoping for a more intimate experience with nature. He had no idea that this trip would lead him into the depths of terror. The day had begun like any other. Ethan had driven deep into the heart of the mountains, leaving behind the hum of civilization for the tranquility of the forest. The trail was rugged, unmaintained, its markings long faded, but Ethan loved it this way. It felt like he was walking in the footsteps of someone who had never been found. By the second day, after trekking through miles of wild terrain, Ethan set up camp beside an old, forgotten ridge that seemed to stretch forever into the mist. The trees here were ancient, their twisted roots and branches reaching out like hands trying to pull him into the earth. The sun had already set, and he was alone with nothing but the crackle of his campfire and the distant sounds of the wilderness. As he sat by the fire, the hairs on the back of his neck began to rise. It wasn't the usual rustling of the forest creatures. No, this was different. It was the sound of something large moving through the trees. A crack of a twig, a heavy breath. Ethan, ever the skeptic, brushed it off as an animal, perhaps a deer or a bear. But deep down, something told him it wasn't just an animal. He stood up, grabbing his flashlight, and cautiously stepped toward the tree line. The beam of light pierced the thick darkness, but nothing was there. The wind howled through the trees, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw something move in the distance. Just a fleeting shadow, something tall, humanoid, but far too large to be a person. He told himself it was nothing more than the wind playing tricks on his eyes, but the unease lingered in his gut. After making sure his campfire was safe, Ethan climbed into his tent, trying to shake the creeping sensation of being watched. He tried to sleep, but it was no use. Every little noise outside, every snap of a twig, seemed to come closer. His mind raced with possibilities, and with each passing minute, he found himself more anxious. Was it just his imagination, or was something out there, lurking just beyond his tent? Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the night, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, like someone or something was pacing around his camp. Ethan's heart raced in his chest. He quietly unzipped the tent and peered into the dark forest. The flashlight barely cut through the dense mist, but he could have sworn he saw footprints in the wet soil near the fire pit. The prints were huge, far too large for any animal he knew. Gripping his flashlight, he stepped outside, scanning the area. The footsteps stopped. Silence. A cold shiver crawled up his spine. He felt it then. A presence, like the air itself had thickened. Something was out there, and it was watching him. Ethan hurriedly doused the fire and retreated back into the safety of his tent, locking the flap shut behind him. But sleep didn't come. He lay in the dark, listening, waiting. The sound of footsteps continued, circling his tent, moving closer. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. A strange, heavy silence hung in the air. He could hear his heartbeat thudding in his ears. Just when he thought it was over, a loud crash came from behind the tent. Something had broken the branches just outside. Ethan's blood ran cold. He grabbed his knife and rushed out, hoping to catch whatever it was off guard. But there was nothing there. In his panic, Ethan realized that he wasn't alone anymore. The footsteps were still there, now rushing away from him, and there, faintly in the distance, he saw it. A figure, tall, its silhouette illuminated by the moonlight as it moved with unnatural speed. His pulse surged as he watched the figure disappear into the mist. He should have stayed put, should have waited for daylight. But something in him pushed him forward, his feet carrying him toward the woods in search of answers, despite the terror clawing at his chest. The deeper he ventured, the more he realized that the path he was following was not a trail. It was something older, forgotten. The trees twisted unnaturally, forming strange, intricate patterns that seemed to draw him in, as if guiding him. His mind Lucas Holloway never liked storms, but tonight, there was no escaping it. The wind howled outside his apartment in the quiet town, and the trees shook as though they might snap in half. It was a typical spring break, except he was stuck indoors, alone. His roommate had gone out of town, leaving him to fend for himself in the small, worn-down apartment on the outskirts of the town. The thunder rumbled like the growl of a beast in the distance, and the rain pelted the windows in sheets, blocking out the faint light from the street lamps outside. Lucas settled into his couch with a bag of chips, planning to make the most of the evening by binge-watching a new TV show he'd been meaning to catch up on. The first hour passed in relative peace, just the steady sound of the storm and the occasional flicker of the TV screen. But then came the doorbell. Lucas froze. He glanced at the clock. It was already past midnight, and he was certain that nobody would be out there at this hour, not in this kind of weather. He hesitated. Maybe it was just the wind rattling the door, or his mind playing tricks on him due to the storm. But the doorbell rang again. This time it was louder, more insistent. Reluctantly, Lucas got up, walked to the door, and peered through the peephole. There was nobody, just the empty, rain-drenched porch. He opened the door slightly, just enough to poke his head out. But there was no one there. The porch was dark and empty, save for the rainwater pooling in the corners. He stepped out onto the wet, wooden floor and looked around, confused. Then the doorbell rang again. Lucas felt his heart skip a beat. He quickly retreated inside, locking the door behind him. His mind raced. Who could it be? What were they doing here at this hour in the middle of this storm? He stood there, listening, hoping it was just the wind. But then came the sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. It was coming from upstairs. His pulse quickened as his eyes darted around the room. The sound continued, a dragging, scraping sound, as though something was being moved slowly, carefully, step by agonizing step. Lucas had lived in this apartment for a year and had never heard a sound like that coming from above. The walls were thin, but not that thin, and he knew for a fact that nobody was up there. His roommate had left, and there was no one else who could be staying in the apartment. He had checked. The sound stopped suddenly, and for a brief moment, there was nothing. Silence. Just the pounding of the rain and the wind outside. Then came a knock at the window. Lucas's breath caught in his throat. His first instinct was to hide, to run. But he couldn't. He was frozen in place, his eyes wide with fear. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a faint scraping sound against the glass. He cautiously moved to the window and, with trembling hands, pulled back the curtain. And there it was, a face, pale and drawn, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through him. Its lips curled into a twisted smile, but there was no warmth in it, just cold, empty malice. The figure stood in the pouring rain, motionless, watching him. Lucas stumbled back, nearly tripping over the coffee table as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. How was that possible? Who could be standing there? It didn't make sense. He was on the second floor, and the only way to get to that window was by climbing up the side of the building. There was no way anyone could have gotten up there without being noticed. And yet, there it was, the face, staring at him. The knock came again, louder this time, more frantic. It was as though the figure was demanding entry, desperate to get inside. Lucas felt the urge to scream, but his throat tightened. He backed away from the window, clutching his chest as though his heart might burst. He turned, ready to flee, but as he did, the lights flickered. The room plunged into darkness. Panic set in. He scrambled for his phone, but when he turned it on, the screen was filled with static. It flickered erratically, then went black. The storm outside had cut off the power, leaving him in complete darkness. Suddenly, the doorbell rang again. It wasn't the same soft chime anymore. This time, the sound was distorted, like someone was trying to force the bell to ring, but it came out as an eerie, scraping noise, almost like a chant, a call. The tone of it sent shivers down his spine. It was no longer just a doorbell. It felt like a warning. With the fear clutching at his chest, Lucas ran to the door and locked every bolt, every latch, his hands shaking as he worked. His mind raced, but he couldn't think. Sophia had always considered herself a strong, independent woman. She lived alone, enjoyed the solitude, and often worked late into the night. So when her best friend, Maya, asked her to house-sit while she was away on a business trip, Sophia didn't think twice. The house was beautiful, a grand two-story home tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, a place that felt more like a sanctuary than a house. The first few days passed in a haze of routine. Sophia would work from home during the day, tend to Maya's plants, and care for the lizards and fish that Maya had left behind. It was peaceful, perhaps too peaceful. The house was large, with high ceilings and long hallways that gave the place an air of quiet isolation. The windows were always fogged up after the rain, and the soft pattering of the storm on the roof became a constant background hum. But as night settled in, the house began to feel different. One evening, around dusk, as the storm outside intensified, Sophia sat at the kitchen table, sipping her tea. The wind howled through the trees outside, rattling the windows. The rain beat against the glass like the fingers of some unseen hand, and the house creaked and groaned under the pressure. It was then she heard it. A cough. At first, she thought it was the wind, a strange sound carried by the gusts. But then it came again, louder this time. It was distinct. It was coming from outside. Sophia jumped to her feet, feeling an inexplicable chill crawl up her spine. She rushed to the back door, flicking the light on. But when she peered outside, there was nothing. No one was there, just the swirling shadows of the trees. She tried to brush it off, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Her heart raced as the storm outside raged on. The air felt thick with unease, as though the house itself were holding its breath. The cough came again. This time, it was followed by a soft, raspy voice. Sophia! Her blood ran cold. It was as if the storm itself had spoken her name. She rushed to the window, pulling back the curtains to peer out into the yard. There was no one there, not even a shadow. Just the dark, rain-soaked lawn stretching out toward the trees. She pressed her hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. It's just the storm, she thought. You're just imagining things. But when she turned back toward the door, the silence was broken again, this time by the sound of something scraping against the window. Sophia froze, her breath caught in her throat. She turned slowly, dread pooling in the pit of her stomach. The curtains swayed slightly, disturbed by the wind, but there, in the corner of her vision, was something that made her heart stop. A face, pale and distorted. A face with hollow eyes and a twisted, unnatural grin, pressed up against the glass. The face was so close she could almost feel the breath on the other side of the window. She screamed, stumbling backward, her heart pounding in her chest. But when she dared to look again, nothing. The face was gone. The window was empty, save for the rain smearing the glass. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she had just seen. Had she imagined it? Was it just a trick of the storm? But the feeling of cold dread didn't fade. It clung to her, wrapping around her like a tightening noose. Sophia locked all the doors, checking each one twice, and turned off every light. She told herself she was overreacting, that she was just tired, but the fear gnawed at her. She crawled into bed, pulling the covers tightly around her, trying to drown out the storm with the sound of her own. Jason had never been the type to be easily scared. He'd worked the late-night shift at the gas station for over a year now, and most nights passed in a dull, predictable routine. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound beside the occasional crackle of static on the radio. It was a job that allowed him to keep to himself, and for that, he was grateful. But tonight, something felt off. The storm had rolled in earlier that evening, and the wind was now howling like a wild animal, pushing against the windows of the small gas station. The parking lot was empty. The usual trucks and cars that would stop for fuel had vanished into the storm, leaving Jason alone in the quiet, dim-lit station. He rested his elbows on the counter, absent-mindedly scrolling through his phone, trying to pass the hours. As the clock ticked past midnight, Jason looked out the window toward the highway. Nothing but darkness stretched for miles, the road almost invisible beneath the pounding rain. The only sign of life was the occasional flash of lightning, casting eerie, jagged shadows across the parking lot. That's when he heard it. Tap. Jason's head snapped up, his eyes darting to the door. The soft, rhythmic tap echoed again, the sound so faint, yet distinct enough to pull him from his thoughts. It came from the front of the station, just outside the glass doors. Jason frowned. He hadn't heard any cars pull up, and the rain was coming down too hard for anyone to be walking outside. The tap came again, louder this time, like something or someone was tapping on the glass with a fingernail. He stood up, his muscles tense, and slowly made his way to the door. His eyes never left the window, the dim light from inside casting his reflection against the glass. With each tap, his heart rate quickened. He reached the door, his hand hovering over the handle. And then silence. His breath caught in his throat. There was no one there. Jason frowned and stepped back. Maybe it was just a branch from the storm hitting the glass, or some other strange noise from the wind. He turned to go back to his station when, tap, there it was again. This time it was more frantic, faster, more insistent. Jason spun around, his breath shallow as he moved back to the door, this time looking around outside with more urgency. He squinted through the heavy rain, trying to make out anything through the downpour. There, just barely visible in the dim light, he saw something. A figure, a man, standing in the pouring rain, staring at him through the window. Jason's heart skipped a beat. The figure was motionless, drenched, his face obscured by shadows, but there was no mistaking the intense gaze locked on him. For a moment, Jason hesitated. He should have called the police, but something in the man's posture, the stillness, the way he seemed to be waiting, kept him rooted in place. The man did not move, didn't make a sound. Jason forced himself to open the door. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice sounding hoarse, even to his own ears. The man's eyes remained fixed on him. Slowly, the figure raised his hand and pointed toward the gas pumps, his fingers shaking, as if struggling to move. I need gas," the man rasped, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. "Please." Jason's instincts screamed at him to stay away, but he didn't know why. He took a cautious step forward. "All right, just stay where you are. I'll take care of it." The man didn't move. His stare never wavered. Jason quickly locked the door behind him and made his way to the pumps. The man's figure remained in place, watching, unmoving. The air felt heavier now, thick with tension, and Jason could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure what it was, but something about the way the man was staring at him unsettled him to his core. Jason opened the gas tank for the pump, his hands shaking slightly as he set it in place. The man didn't speak again, didn't even acknowledge Jason's presence, just continued to stand in the same spot, his fingers still pointing toward the pump. Jason tried to shake off the feeling of dread that was creeping over him, forcing himself to stay calm. But then, out of nowhere, a voice pierced the silence. "Do you know what happens to people who come here during storms like this?" Jason froze. The voice had come from the man, but he hadn't moved his lips. It was more like a thought, a whisper in his mind that echoed through his skull. His breath caught in his throat, and he glanced nervously at the man, whose eyes remained locked on him. Lily had never been one to shy away from the quiet. She enjoyed her solitude, often finding peace in the silence of her apartment as she worked on her latest writing projects. But tonight was different. The rain had started early, and the storm that followed seemed almost alive. The wind howled through the trees, sending branches rattling against the window, while the thunder rumbled so loudly that it seemed to shake the house to its very foundation. It was the perfect kind of night for staying in. Just Lily, her laptop, and the quiet hum of the rain. Her best friend, Emma, had asked her to house sit for the weekend while she was away on a business trip. The house was large, with old wooden floors that creaked with each step and long hallways that led to rooms with thick, velvet curtains drawn shut. It was cozy enough, but as the night wore on, the house began to feel different. Felt heavy, like it was watching her. The storm outside was relentless, and as Lily sat at the kitchen table, trying to focus on her work, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house seemed to breathe with the wind, and occasionally, she would hear a faint whisper. Too faint to be real, too real to ignore. She shrugged it off, blaming it on her imagination. After all, she'd spent countless nights alone, and this house wasn't any different. It was around 10:30 p.m. when she decided to take a break. She made her way upstairs to Emma's bedroom, the room with the large windows that overlooked the backyard. The wind had calmed slightly, but the rain was still falling in torrents, almost drowning out all sound. As she stood by the window, looking out into the yard, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. A figure, a man, standing in the middle of the yard, facing the house. Lily's breath caught in her throat. The figure stood motionless, his body outlined by the soft glow of the porch light. He was tall, cloaked in a dark, tattered coat, and his head was lowered, as if he were staring at the ground. But the strange thing was, he wasn't moving. He was completely still, as if frozen in place. Lily's instincts screamed at her to call the police, to lock the doors, but she was paralyzed, unable to tear her eyes away from the figure. The rain continued to fall in sheets, but the man remained perfectly still, unmoving, as if waiting for something. Waiting for her. A sudden chill ran down her spine, and without thinking, she pulled away from the window, backing up against the wall. Her phone, which had been resting on the nightstand, buzzed loudly, breaking the silence. Her heart leaped in her chest, and she quickly picked it up. It was a text from Emma. "Hey, everything okay? I tried calling, but I couldn't reach you." Lily quickly typed back, her hands trembling as she did. "Yeah, everything's fine. Just a little jumpy from the storm. I'm going to bed soon." But even as she hit send, her mind kept racing. The man outside, was he real? Was he just someone walking by, caught in the rain? Or was he watching her, waiting? She turned off the light in the room, trying to calm her nerves, but the feeling of being watched persisted. She locked the bedroom door, double-checking that it was secure, and climbed into bed. The storm outside only seemed to grow louder, but it wasn't the thunder that kept her awake. It was the sound of something else. The tapping came from downstairs. Soft, gentle tapping, as if someone was knocking on the door, or perhaps on the window. Lily lay still, her breath shallow as she strained to listen. The tapping continued, slow and rhythmic, as though it were deliberate. She had to make sure she was just imagining things. She slowly got out of bed, her legs shaky beneath her, and tiptoed toward the staircase. As she reached the top of the stairs, the sound stopped. Silence. But just as she was about to breathe a sigh of relief, she heard something else. Faint whispers, too soft to make out. They were coming from downstairs. Lily's heart raced as she crept down the stairs, every step echoing in the otherwise quiet house. She was terrified, her skin crawling, but she couldn't just sit there. She had to know what was happening. Slowly, carefully, she moved toward the living room, peeking around the corner. The room was empty, but the window there on the far wall was open. Lily froze. She didn't remember opening the window, and the thought that someone might have done it while she was upstairs filled her with dread. She was sure the window had been shut when she came up earlier. The cool night air slipped in, making the room feel even colder. Just as she stepped toward the window to close it, she heard the sound again, the unmistakable noise of someone walking in the house. Lily spun around, but there was no one there. The whispers grew louder, like they were circling her, coming from every direction. Her eyes darted to the hallway, the door leading to the basement, the dark corners of the room. But there was nothing. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was getting closer. The tapping, slow and deliberate, was now right behind her. She spun around again, heart pounding in her chest, but there was still no one. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she backed up, her back hitting the wall. And then she saw it. A shadow. A shape. It wasn't human, at least not in the way she understood it. It was tall, its limbs long and stretched, its outline jagged, like something that didn't quite belong in this world. The figure stood just beyond the doorway, watching her, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Lily's legs gave out beneath her. She slid to the floor, too terrified to move. And then, from the darkness, came a voice. Not a whisper this time, but a harsh, guttural whisper that filled her mind, grating against her thoughts. "You shouldn't have come here, Lily. You should never have stayed." The shadow began to move toward her. Lily scrambled backward, but she couldn't escape. Her mind screamed at her to run, but her body was frozen, trapped in the gaze of the figure. She felt its cold presence closing in, its breath, or something like it, pressing against her skin. Just as it reached out for her, everything went black. Max had never been fond of long drives, especially at night. But tonight, he found himself on a winding stretch of highway that seemed to go on forever, cutting through the dense forest like a serpent. The headlights of his car barely penetrated the thick fog that seemed to settle in deeper with every passing mile. The radio was nothing but static, and the low hum of the engine was the only sound, echoing in the quiet of the night. The GPS had long since lost signal, and Max wasn't sure if he was on the right road anymore. But he had no choice but to keep moving. He hadn't seen another car in hours. It was the perfect kind of road trip, a journey away from everything, to clear his head. The pain of losing his younger brother, Jason, still lingered like a wound that wouldn't heal. Driving through the middle of nowhere, far from home, seemed like the only way to escape it all, even if only for a while. The miles ticked by, the road stretching out ahead like an endless ribbon of black. Max tried to focus on the road, but his mind wandered back to the accident that had taken his brother's life. He had been there that night, a few steps away, helpless. Max cursed under his breath, trying to shake the memory, but it was always there, lingering, suffocating him. Suddenly, the car hit a pothole, snapping him back to reality. Max cursed again, gripping the wheel tighter as the car swerved slightly, barely staying on course. That's when he saw it, off in the distance, barely visible through the fog, a figure standing by the side of the road. Max's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure if his mind was playing tricks on him, but it looked like a person. A man, standing motionless in the middle of nowhere. Max's eyes narrowed, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. He didn't want to stop. Not this late, not here, not with the road so empty. But the figure stood there, unmoving, just watching him. Max's foot hovered over the brake. The car's headlights shone directly on the man now, and Max could see him clearly. He was wearing a dark coat, tattered and weathered by the years. His face was shadowed, but Max could make out the unsettling way the man's head was tilted at an unnatural angle, as if examining the car. The man didn't move, didn't even blink. His posture was rigid, almost too still to be human. Max swallowed hard. "What the hell?" he muttered under his breath. He almost decided to keep driving, but something in his gut told him to stop. Maybe it was the eerie feeling gnawing at him, or maybe it was just the need to know. What was this man doing out here, alone, in the middle of nowhere? His curiosity won out over his fear. Max pulled the car over to the side of the road, the engine's idle hum the only sound in the eerie silence. He got out, the cool night air biting at his skin. The fog seemed to grow thicker, swallowing the edges of the road. He took a few steps toward the man, who still hadn't moved an inch. "Hey!" Max called, his voice trembling slightly. "Are you okay?" The figure didn't respond. There was no movement, no sound at all. Max took another step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He was close enough now to see the man's face. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes were wide, too wide. They were black, voids of darkness, reflecting nothing but emptiness. It was the eyes that unsettled Max the most, those hollow eyes staring at him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. Max's breath caught in his throat. The man's mouth opened slowly, impossibly wide, as if stretching in a grotesque, inhuman manner. "You shouldn't be here." Max recoiled, a chill running through his veins. The voice was hollow, like it came from deep within the earth, resonating in his bones. He took a step back, his foot slipping on the wet gravel. His heart raced as he fumbled to get back in his car, his hands shaking. But before he could reach the door, the man's voice echoed again, louder this time as if surrounding him. "The road will never end." Max's eyes snapped back to the man, who was now closer, standing just feet away. His hands were raised, fingers twitching unnaturally. Max felt his stomach churn as a sense of dread gripped him. The man wasn't walking, but somehow he was moving, too quickly, too smoothly, like he wasn't bound by the rules of the world Max knew. Panic surged through him, and he jumped into the car, slamming the door shut with a force that echoed in the quiet night. The engine roared to life as Max slammed his foot on the gas pedal, the tires screeching against the wet pavement. He didn't dare look back. The road stretched on, but it felt different now. The fog was thicker, the air heavier, and the road ahead seemed to shift in ways that didn't make sense. Max glanced at the GPS, nothing. It was frozen, a blank screen staring back at him. The headlights flickered as the rain began to pour harder, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Max's heart pounded as he continued driving, trying to shake the image of the man from his mind. But the road never seemed to end. Every turn, every bend led to another stretch of highway, identical to the last. No sign of civilization, no exit signs, no towns, no other cars. Max's mind was starting to unravel. Had he missed something? Was the road looping back on itself? Was he going in circles? The storm outside intensified, the wind howling louder, drowning out all other sounds. And then, through the thick fog, he saw it. A silhouette, standing by the side of the road. His blood ran cold. It was the same man. Max slammed on the brakes, his car skidding to a stop just inches from the figure. The man was standing there, watching him again, his twisted smile stretching across his face. Max's vision blurred as his head spun. He was trapped in the same place, the same road, with nowhere to go. The man slowly raised his hand, pointing toward the horizon. Max's eyes followed the direction, and what he saw made his stomach drop. In the distance, through the fog, he could see the endless stretch of highway going on forever. And there, at the end of the road, was another figure. And another. And another. The road was never going to end. Max screamed, but no sound came out. His hands gripped the wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He turned the car around, desperate to escape, but the figures continued to appear, surrounding him. No matter which way he drove, no matter how fast he sped, he couldn't escape. The road was endless. The fog was endless. The man's twisted grin haunted him, whispering the same words over and over. "You shouldn't have come here." Max slammed his foot on the gas, but it was too late. The figures closed in, and the road swallowed him whole. Sarah had spent months searching for the perfect place. After the death of her fiancé, she needed a fresh start, somewhere quiet, somewhere that could offer solace. She found it in a quaint house at the edge of a sleepy town, a house tucked away from the noise of the world, surrounded by overgrown trees and a stillness that almost felt sacred. The house was old, but sturdy, with creaky wooden floors and faded wallpaper. It was the kind of house that whispered history, each corner holding secrets, and Sarah welcomed it. She needed this escape from the past, a space to rebuild. But from the moment she stepped inside, something felt wrong. The air was thick with the scent of dust and something else, something faintly metallic like old iron. The floors groaned as if the house itself were alive, settling with the weight of time. The windows were covered with heavy curtains, blocking out the gray light of the early afternoon. It was a house that seemed to swallow sound, leaving behind an eerie quiet that made Sarah's footsteps feel too loud. But she shook it off. It was just an old house, she thought. Old houses made sounds. Nothing to worry about. The first few days passed uneventfully, with Sarah unpacking and getting to know the house. She explored each room with a sense of curiosity, but the deeper she went into the house, the more she felt like there was something just beyond her reach, something pressing against the walls, waiting to be discovered. It wasn't until the storm arrived that the true nature of the house revealed itself. The rain started that evening, light at first, but quickly escalating into a torrential downpour. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the thunder cracked through the air with a ferocity that seemed to shake the very ground beneath her. The power flickered, and then went out, leaving Sarah in complete darkness. She fumbled for her phone, turning on the flashlight, and made her way down the hallway to find the candles she had set aside for just such an occasion. As she passed the old living room, she noticed something strange. The walls in the hallway seemed different, darker. The shadows seemed thicker, as though they were reaching out, pulling at the edges of the room. Sarah paused, feeling the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She glanced at the wall opposite her. The one she had never really noticed before seemed wrong. There was a faint, pulsating shadow moving behind it, like something was pushing against the surface, trying to break through. Sarah stepped closer, her breath shallow in the thickening air. She reached out to touch the wall, but as soon as her fingers brushed against it, she felt it. A sudden, jarring jolt, like a shock of electricity running through her hand. She pulled back immediately, her heart racing. She glanced down the hallway. The house was still, but the air felt thick with tension. She felt it. A presence, something watching her from the shadows. The feeling only intensified as the storm raged outside. The walls seemed to groan, as if the house itself were coming alive, moving around her. But when she tried to tell herself it was just the wind, the house gave a soft, sickening creak. Came from the wall. Sounded like breathing. Her eyes darted back to the wall, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw something. Two dark, hollow shapes in the shadows. Eyes watching her from behind the plaster. Her breath caught in her throat. No, couldn't be. She shook her head, dismissing the thought as pure madness. She had to be imagining it. But the eyes, those eyes, they were there, and they were watching her. She stumbled back, the candles flickering wildly in her trembling hands. A sudden crash of thunder shook the house to its core, sending the candles tumbling to the floor. Darkness enveloped her, but then the eyes blinked. Sarah gasped, her entire body freezing in place. The shadows in the wall shifted, the dark shapes moving slowly, as if they were reaching for her, closing in from all sides. She could feel their coldness, like fingers of ice brushing against her skin. The house was breathing, alive, hungry. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice shaking, barely above a whisper. No answer. But then came a sound, low and guttural, like something was scraping against the walls from inside. The sound grew louder, closer, more insistent. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from behind the wall, as if something or someone was trying to break free. Sarah backed away, her heart pounding in her chest. The walls began to throb with the sound of something large moving behind them, twisting, pressing against the plaster. The entire house seemed to shift, groaning as if in pain. She ran to the front door, yanking it open, but the wind and rain were so intense she couldn't see anything outside. It felt as though the storm itself was trying to pull her back inside, to keep her from escaping. She slammed the door shut, locking it, her breath coming in ragged gasps. That's when she heard it. The soft scratching, the whisper of nails against the wall. Something was on the other side. Suddenly, the wall buckled, the plaster cracked, and the shapes, those eyes, appeared again. But this time, they weren't just shadows. They were figures, tall, grotesque, twisting forms that slithered out of the cracks in the wall, their faces contorted with hunger and rage. Their mouths opened wide, impossibly wide, and as they reached for her, Sarah screamed. And in that moment, as the walls closed in around her, she understood what the house had been hiding all along. The eyes had always been there. They were waiting for her. Oliver had never intended to return to Willow Street, not after all these years. But when the letter arrived informing him that his estranged father had passed away, the choice had been made for him. He inherited the house, an old, creaky, Victorian-style building that looked as though it had been forgotten by time. Despite his unease, Oliver couldn't help but feel the pull of curiosity. Maybe it was the bloodline, the ties to the past that he never really knew, or perhaps it was just the feeling of needing to move on. Regardless, he found himself standing in front of the old house, the key cold in his hand, ready to unlock the door to a new chapter. The house was just as he remembered, damp, abandoned, yet oddly grand, as though it had once held untold stories behind its walls. The yard was overgrown, the paint peeling off the house's exterior, giving it a haunted, forgotten look. The windows stared blankly at him, their curtains billowing in the wind, as if they were watching him approach. Oliver unlocked the door, the hinges creaking like a dying breath as he pushed it open. The musty smell of dust and old wood flooded his senses. He stepped inside, his footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Everything was coated in layers of dust, the furniture covered in old sheets, and the floors were cold and uneven beneath his feet. The house felt alive, like it was breathing, watching him with unseen eyes. But Oliver dismissed it as his overactive imagination. He hadn't been here in years, after all. His father had lived here alone for as long as he could remember, and the place always had a strange energy to it. The kind of energy that unsettled you just by being near it. But as the evening wore on, Oliver started to feel the weight of the house more acutely. There were creaks and groans in the walls, footsteps above him in the attic, yet he was certain he was alone. The old house seemed to whisper, as if it was trying to tell him something. Every now and then, he would hear faint murmurs, voices too soft to make out, just beyond the edge of his hearing. But when he would look around, there was no one. He ignored it, chalking it up to the wind, to the house settling in the night. But as midnight approached, the house began to feel different. The whispers grew louder. Oliver had just finished unpacking a few things in the living room when he heard it, the unmistakable sound of someone breathing. It was slow and heavy, coming from just behind him. He spun around, his heart racing, but the room was empty. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the air in the room felt thick, suffocating. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and for the first time he felt a real sense of unease. The air grew colder. Oliver shivered, reaching for the old, cracked thermostat. It was broken, the needle stuck in place, unmoving. He stood there for a moment, his gaze drifting to the staircase that led to the second floor. The house was quiet again, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him from the shadows. Thump. The sound came from upstairs. A loud, deliberate thud. His heart skipped a beat. He hesitated, his hand on the railing as he slowly ascended the stairs, the wood creaking beneath his feet. The second floor was dark, the hallway stretching ahead like a tunnel. The light from the single bulb at the top of the stairs flickered ominously as he moved forward. The door to his father's old bedroom was slightly ajar, just a crack, and through the gap, Oliver could see a shadow moving inside. A figure, tall and thin, standing in the middle of the room. The breath caught in his throat as he approached the door. "Hello?" he called, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure didn't respond. It was just standing there, its back to the door, as if it were waiting for something. Oliver pushed the door open, his mind racing with questions. But when he stepped inside, the room was empty. No one was there. The only thing left was the faint smell of his father's cologne, mixed with something far more unsettling. Something musty, like decay. He stepped forward, heart pounding, and reached out to touch the dresser. That's when he saw it, the reflection in the mirror. At first, it was a blur, but as he focused, he could make out the figure standing just behind him. A man, tall and thin, wearing a suit that was decades out of fashion. His face was gaunt, pale, and his eyes, those black, empty eyes, stared at Oliver with an intensity that made him feel as though he were being devoured. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. He was whispering something, but it was as if his voice was trapped in the mirror. Oliver staggered backward, his pulse racing, his mind refusing to process what he had just seen. He turned, his breath shallow, and fled from the room. He ran downstairs, the walls closing in around him, the whispers growing louder, more frantic. The house seemed to shift, the air thick with the presence of something watching, waiting. As he reached the front door, it slammed shut on its own, the sound of wood against wood vibrating through his bones. He turned, desperate to leave, but the house had other plans. The walls began to close in. The windows were now black, the air heavy with an unholy presence. He tried to break open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The house was trapping him, and the voices, the whispers, were everywhere now. They were coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. They were suffocating him. "You shouldn't have come here, Oliver." The voice came from behind him. He turned to see the figure again, standing in the corner, his empty eyes fixed on Oliver. His mouth opened, wide, impossibly wide, and the whispers turned into a single, deafening roar. "You belong to us now," Oliver screamed, but it was drowned out by the sound of the house, its walls groaning, its foundation shaking. The figure moved toward him, its body contorting in unnatural ways. And as the house collapsed around him, the last thing Oliver saw were the empty eyes of his father's ghost, watching him as he was swallowed by the darkness. When Claire first received the letter from the lawyer, she was shocked. The letter was brief, but it carried an air of finality. It told her that she had inherited the manor from her late uncle, who she hadn't seen in over a decade. Her uncle, Samuel, had been a reclusive man, known for his strange behavior and odd mannerisms. He had lived alone in that enormous, decaying house for as long as Claire could remember, and when he passed away under mysterious circumstances, there were no funeral arrangements, no memorials, just silence. The letter was signed, "Your presence is required. Please come to the manor immediately." So she did. The drive to the manor was long and desolate, winding through thick woods that seemed to close in on her with every mile. The weather was cold, and the winds howled as if warning her to turn back. The house loomed in the distance when Claire finally reached it. It was massive, an imposing stone structure with tall, jagged windows that seemed to watch her every move. The ivy clung to the walls like it was trying to suffocate the life out of it, and the roof sagged under the weight of time and neglect. With a deep breath, Claire pushed open the heavy wooden door. It creaked loudly, protesting as though it hadn't been opened in years. The house was dim, lit only by the faint glow of the moon streaming through the dirty windows. The air inside was cold, musty, and thick with the scent of old wood and something far more sinister, like the house itself had absorbed years of pain, sorrow, and regret. She wandered through the empty hallways, her footsteps echoing against the walls. The house was quiet, too quiet, and it made her feel small, insignificant. The floorboards groaned beneath her feet as she explored the rooms, each one more lifeless than the last. The furniture was covered in dust, the drapes heavy with age, and the air felt thick with the weight of forgotten memories. As she reached the back of the house, she found the study. It was a small, dim room filled with old books and papers, some of which had been scattered across the floor. There was a desk in the center, with a single lamp that flickered as though it were struggling to stay on. On the desk was a journal, a leather-bound book that seemed to pulse with an unsettling energy. Claire opened the journal and began to read. It was her uncle's handwriting, though it was shaky and erratic, as if he had been in a state of fear or distress. The entries grew darker as she flipped through the pages. Samuel spoke of something he had discovered in the house, something hidden away that he was warned never to open. It was a room that should never be disturbed. Claire paused, her fingers trembling on the pages. The last entry was particularly unsettling. It read, "I have opened the door. I wish I hadn't. There is something in that room, something that speaks to me. It knows my name. It knows everything." A chill ran through Claire's body as she closed the journal. She couldn't shake the feeling that her uncle had been trying to warn her. She needed to know what had happened to him, what he had uncovered. The answer was here somewhere in this house. And that's when she saw it, the door. It was at the end of the hallway, hidden behind a large, tattered tapestry. The door was small, inconspicuous, almost like it didn't belong. It wasn't even locked, and it swung open with a creak as Claire pushed it. Beyond the door was a narrow staircase that led down into the darkness. She hesitated for a moment, but something inside her urged her forward. She had to know. With each step down, the air grew colder, thicker, and the silence more oppressive. It was as though the house was holding its breath, waiting. Claire reached the bottom of the stairs and found herself standing in front of another door. This one was different, old, weathered, and stained with what looked like old blood. The handle was made of tarnished silver, and when she touched it, it felt wrong, like it was burning her skin. Taking a deep breath, Claire turned the handle and stepped inside. What she saw was beyond anything she could have imagined. The room was small, the walls lined with shelves filled with jars and strange objects. The air was thick, suffocating, and the smell was overwhelming, rotting, decaying, like something had died here long ago. There was a single chair in the center of the room, facing a mirror that was covered in a dark, viscous substance. The mirror seemed to distort reality, twisting and warping everything it reflected. And then, Claire heard it. A voice. "You shouldn't have come here." The words echoed in her mind, but the voice wasn't coming from the air. It was coming from the mirror. Claire stepped closer, her pulse racing as the mirror seemed to grow darker, deeper, as if it was swallowing her whole. Suddenly, the reflection in the mirror changed. The room behind her was gone. Instead, she saw something else. Another version of herself, but this one was distorted, her face twisted in agony, her eyes wide with terror. The reflection moved, but Claire didn't. She watched in horror as her reflection smiled, slowly, sinisterly, before it mouthed the words, "You're mine now." Claire stumbled backward, her breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. The door slammed shut behind her, trapping her in the room. She turned to find the walls closing in, the shadows growing darker, suffocating her. The air grew heavier with each passing second. She reached for the door, but it wouldn't open. The room seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The mirror continued to twist, showing her reflections that weren't hers. Visions of things she couldn't comprehend. Faces, long lost and forgotten, stared at her from the glass, their eyes wide and pleading. "Leave this place, Claire. You've awakened it." The voice was louder now, no longer just a whisper, but a scream that seemed to tear through the very fabric of reality. It was too late. The room was alive. It was hungry, and Claire knew in that moment that there would be no escaping it. Nathaniel had never believed in family legacies. His life had been one of independence, working as a successful architect, building his future from the ground up. So when the letter arrived, telling him that he had inherited an old mansion from a relative he had never met, he was skeptical, to say the least. The letter was cryptic and unsettling, signed only with the initials CD, and included an address to a mansion hidden away in the middle of nowhere, far from the bustle of the city. Curiosity got the better of him, as it often did, and after weeks of deliberating, Nathaniel decided to visit the mansion. He didn't expect to find anything of value, just an old, decaying house with some family history he could sell off. What he didn't expect was the suffocating darkness that seemed to embrace the mansion as he arrived. The house was exactly what he imagined. A crumbling Gothic structure with ivy creeping up its walls, windows darkened by years of neglect. The tall, iron gates creaked in the wind as he pushed them open, stepping onto the overgrown grounds. The house itself stood ominously against the stormy sky, its shadow stretching like an eerie specter. It was as though the mansion was waiting for him, patient, cold, and old beyond measure. He walked up the grand steps to the entrance, the door opening with a faint groan as though it had not been disturbed in years. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the silence was oppressive. The wallpaper was peeling, the furniture covered in a layer of mold and rot. But there was something more than just age in the air, something colder, something deeper. The mansion had a life of its own. It felt as though it was breathing, exhaling its long-held secrets into the very space around him. He took a deep breath, shaking off the discomfort. He'd inherited the place, and he intended to claim it, whether it gave him answers or not. As he wandered through the large, empty rooms, he felt the sensation of being watched. The portraits on the walls seemed to follow him with their hollow eyes. The stairway at the end of the hall led up to a darkened second floor. His eyes scanned the room again. There was something about the house that unsettled him, an inexplicable tension in the air. Yet he ignored it, telling himself it was just the atmosphere of the old house. In the back of the mansion, he found a library filled with dusty books, their leather covers cracked with age. At the far end of the room was a large, ornate door, different from the others. It was carved with intricate patterns, symbols that Nathaniel didn't recognize. His fingers lingered on the door handle, its cold metal sending a shiver up his spine. He hesitated but pushed it open, stepping into the dark room beyond. The moment he crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped, as though the room had been frozen in time. The air was thick, heavy, and the shadows seemed to cling to the walls. The room was smaller than he expected, filled with nothing but a single chair positioned directly in front of an old, full-length mirror. Nathaniel's breath caught as he looked into the mirror. The reflection that stared back at him wasn't quite his own. His face was pale, and his eyes looked hollow, almost as if he were a ghost. The lighting was dim, but in the reflection, something stood behind him, dark, shifting, indistinct. He spun around, but there was no one there. His pulse quickened. Something was wrong with this room. He took a step back, but the door slammed shut behind him with a deafening bang. The force of the door's impact rattled the walls, and the sound reverberated through his skull. The air felt suffocating, and the shadows in the room seemed to shift, growing darker. He rushed to the door, but the handle wouldn't turn. He tried again, but it was stuck, as though something was holding it shut from the other side. Panic set in. He turned back toward the mirror, hoping to gain some clarity, but as he did, he saw something else in the reflection. His own face was still staring back at him, but now, there was a figure standing just behind him. The figure was tall, its body covered in tattered, shadowy robes. Its face was obscured by a dark, hooded cloak, but its eyes were glowing faintly in the reflection, burning with an unnatural light. "You shouldn't have come," the figure whispered, its voice like a hiss, but it didn't come from the mirror. It came from inside his head. Nathaniel stumbled back, his breath ragged, his heart hammering in his chest. He couldn't look away from the figure. It didn't move, but somehow it was getting closer, inching its way toward him in the reflection. He turned, but the room was empty. There was nothing behind him. But in the mirror, the figure was closer than ever, its glowing eyes now just inches from his own face. "It's not too late to leave, Nathaniel." The voice echoed in his mind, low and threatening. His hands were trembling as he grabbed the mirror, his fingers slipping against the cold glass. He had to break it. It was the only way. With a scream, he slammed his palm against the mirror. But it didn't shatter. The glass didn't break. It bent, twisted. The reflection rippled like water, distorting his own image. His reflection grinned at him, an unsettling, malevolent smile that stretched too wide, far beyond what should be possible. "You'll never leave," the figure whispered again, its mouth moving. Though the words came from the mirror itself, its voice now a cacophony of dissonant whispers. In a frenzy, Nathaniel pulled at the door handle again, but this time it turned. The door creaked open, and he rushed out, stumbling into the hallway. His heart was racing. He couldn't stop looking over his shoulder, but the figure was gone, vanished. But the house wasn't done with him yet. As he ran through the house, his feet pounding against the floor, the walls began to shake, groaning under an unseen weight. The door slammed behind him, but the sound was muffled by the voices, thousands of voices, screaming at him, whispering his name, calling him back. The paintings on the walls began to twist and distort, their faces contorted into grotesque forms, their eyes following him, pleading with him to stop. He tried to leave, but every door he opened led to another room. The hallways twisted, and the air grew thicker. The house had changed, shifting around him, trapping him within its ever-expanding walls. It was alive. The mansion was alive, and it was hungry for him. Just as he reached the front door, it slammed shut, locking him inside once more. The house closed in on him, the walls pulsating, breathing. The last thing Nathaniel saw was his own reflection in the hallway mirror, grinning back at him. And then the house swallowed him whole.